can remember very well opera, literature, horticulture, biologists, everybody working together. Compose not only our people who participate from the artistic scene, but also especially together with civil society. As a European biennial, we think that critical transformation of what biennials are should be reconsidered, especially in the light of the pandemic, and maybe because of the resources that have been available to so many during the limited resources to so many during the last trying period. And Manifesta would like to undertake all efforts to create a framework also in this and the upcoming editions in Barcelona and Roer, to focus much more on co-creation, co-production of projects together with local and regional communities, and to build alternative, sustainable models to experiment how and in which way we can live together, work together, and learning from each other. It has become more apparent that institutions like Manifesta urgently need to work towards building interregional networks. And this is not only for here, this is also for the future to come. Not only in regard to interdisciplinarity, but foremost, as I said, to creating individual networks based on necessity, on urgency, reciprocity, and trust. That is essential for all Manifesta's programs and was given as a condition within the selection process to identify the creative mediator. And we're using this wording already since Manifesta 12, Palermo, creative mediator, which I heard sound very alien to people here, due to the fact that we search for profiles of people who want to mediate, instigate, stimulate, co-develop, co-produce, the most important factor, creativity. And as I said before, this could range from political activism, ecology, poetry, photography, and so forth. And that's why we finally here today on the 12th of October proudly introduce you to the Creative Mediator of Manifesta 14, which will open its doors for 100 days next year on the 22nd of July 2022. The Australian Berlin-based Catherine Nichols has been selected because of a very concentrated expertise and vision to build up over the past decades as an arts and literary scholar, a creative mediator and a writer, especially in regard to her role as the artistic director of the centenary program of Joseph Beuys, called Beuys 2021. This program, still running throughout this year, comprises of more than 30 interdisciplinary cultural events in the German state of North Rhine-Westphalia. And the board of Manifesta is convinced that through her open approach, her forward-thinking vision, she is the perfect fit to create and co-produce with the team of Manifesta in Prishtina an alternative artistic and social range of practices we very hope to establish in Prishtina, specifically touching upon key issues of our work, namely how to transform an art biennial into a more sustainable, experimental, interdisciplinary, collective platform. And our aim is to develop a new symbiosis between art, culture, and communal identity. Concretely, this will mean that Catherine Nichols, whom we welcome so dearly today, is invited to already explain the essential framework of our artistic concept, and that's quite unique, and also highlight the more permanent, sustainable part of the Manifesta 14 program. So those part of the program which will last after Manifesta has left. And we spoke this morning that we need to create a system to integrate the institutions, but also to integrate budget plans inside the biennial framework to make sure that it doesn't implode after Manifesta has left in a post-Manifesta period. Next to the appointment of the Creative Mediator and the introduction to her program, we are of course delighted to answer many pressing questions that concern the local cultural ecosystem in Prishtina, which also pop up in every biennial where Manifesta, because of its nomadic nature, arrives. This being how Kosovar and regional artists and organizations will be invited to participate. And I think we have a slide for this which explains a little bit more. Because people want to know, what does it mean for me as an artist, as an organization, as a political activist, as an artistic or ecological activist? And to explain this more precisely, since it is an institutional issue, I would like to draw your attention to the visual, which highlights the manner in which all of Manifesta's activities will incorporate Kosovar individual participants as well as organizational ones, in conjunction to the individual and organizational contributors, which comprises mostly in all the Manifesta 30% of Manifesta 14 participants. We will also create tandems, sustainable tandems, between international institutions and Kosovar institutions. Current and future Manifesta host cities will take care. Think about one institution here, together with an institution in Barcelona. Think about an institution of Urbane Kunst in Ruhr, together with an institution. And these tandems are potentially, and we hope, to be continued after Manifesta has left. And these tandems will co-produce and co-create projects during the Biennale. You see this on the slide. Additionally, Manifesta 14 will launch in November, in a month 2021, an open call for 15 Kosovar projects which will be integrated in the program, in the general program. The selection of which will be made by a jury consisting of a mix of international and Kosovar experts. Last but not least, you see this also in the slide, regional projects have been initiated together with Skopje, Tirana, Sofia, Sarajevo, Belgrade, Mitrovica, and which will be included within the framework of the Manifesta 14 Western Balkans project, which generously has been supported by the European Commission. It is therefore our great pleasure to have so many of the partners, especially for today's and next day's events. Also a very warm welcome to you, regional partners. That leaves me now to invite the Minister of Culture, Youth and Sports, Mr. Hajrulla Çeku, who so generously supported Manifesta 14's program until now. I hope, Minister, you will also like to delve into Catherine Nichols' concept as much as I did in the last few days with the board and our team, and we very much look forward to speaking to all of you in person and hopefully to creating new stories together for Prishtina. Thank you so much.
Përshëndetje, të nderuar anëtar të panelit, pranishëm, mysafir, mirëdita dhe mirë se ardhët. Kosova po bëhet gati për ndryshime të rëndësishme në kulturë. 20 vjet pas luftës, kultura në Kosovë numëron një nivel të paprecedent të zhvillimeve në prodhimtari artistike. Ndryshimet vrehen edhe në ngritjet kapaciteteve njerëzore, të cilat që një kohë të gjatë dëshmuan që zhvillimet në shekullin 20 nuk ishin të rastishme dhe që ky komunitet është përplot potencial kreativ, përplot profile të ndryshme kreative, i larmishëm dhe i plot fuqishëm në çdo nivel të shprehjes artistike paralel me shtetet e tjera të botës. Kosovës gradualisht po i krijohen edhe kapacitetet e nevojshme mbështetëse për krijimtari më të lirë, për hapësirë pune më të madhe dhe për hapësirë pune pa burokraci. Përveç punës në aspektin ligjor, ngritjes së mbështetjes financiare, krijimit të moduleve të reja të mbështetjes për art, në vendin tonë tashmë po punohet fuqishëm drejt rrjedhëzimit masiv dhe shfrytëzimit të potencialit diplomatik të kulturës. Shembull shumë i mirë i këtij zhvillimi është Manifesta, e cila për herë të parë vije në këtë pjesë të Evropës drejt e në Kosovë. Manifesta si një prej platformave më kreative dhe alternative të formatit të bienales, zë vend shumë natyrshëm në ambientin kulturor të Kosovës. Manifesta po ashtu vjen në këtë periudhë të zhvillimit ku në Kosovë komuniteti artistik dhe i gjithë ekosistemi kulturës është gati për ndryshime me ndikim afatgjatë. Pikërisht këtu vjen në shprehje bashkëpunimi ynë, i cili duhet të jetë i orientuar deri në shterjen e çdo kapaciteti që ofron kjo platformë e Manifestës, që padyshim se do të shërbejë thellësisht kulturës në vendin tonë. Ky bashkëpunim do të kontribuojë në ridefinimin, rikonceptimin, eksperimentimin dhe çlirimin e të gjitha kapaciteteve vendore artistike në një nivel shumë më të gjerë në rajon dhe përtej rajonit. Ky është moment po ashtu për të parë ndryshimet në lidhje me mënyrën se si organizojmë hapësirën kulturore dhe si organizojmë kulturën në kohë. Manifesta ofron kushte për të testuar modele të reja të planifikimit hapësinor në kulturë. Këtu pra tash të gjithë ne kemi këtë rast unik për të eksperimentuar edhe me hapësirën publike, për të ridestinuar përdorshmërinë e saj, por edhe më me rëndësi për të kthyer hapësirën publike tek vetë publiku i Kosovës. Ministria e Kulturës, Rinjtësisë dhe Sportit është dedikuar në mbështetjen e aktiviteteve të Manifestës dhe gjithë komunitetit artistik të Kosovës, që së bashku të përfitojmë nga bashkëpunimi ndërsjellë dhe që ky bashkëpunim të sjellë fryte afatgjate për gjithë shoqërinë tonë. Ju falenderoj për mundësinë dhe vëmendjen.
I dashur Ministër Çeku, e nderuara drejtoreshe e Manifestës zonja Hedwig Fijen, i nderuar nën kryetari i bordit Yll Rugova, përfaqësues të misioneve diplomatike, të dashur të pranishëm e ju që po na ndihni përmes platformës online. Përshëndetje për të gjithë ju dhe ju falenderoj shumë për fjalën e dhënë dhe mundësinë për bashkëpunimin shumë të mirë gjatë këtij rrugtimi tashmë 3 vjeçar, rrugtim që nuk ka qenë fare i lehtë duke marrë parasysh veçanërisht situatën me pandeminë e problemet e ndryshme me të cilat jemi duke përballë si qenie njerëzore në planetin Tokë. Është kënaqësi të jem këtu i pranishëm mes jush në njërin nga momentet më të rëndësishme, për njërin nga projektet më të rëndësishme edukativo-kulturore që ka ndodhur ndonjëherë në rajon, po ndodh tash në qytetin tonë të dashur, kryeqytetin tonë Prishtinën. Fillimisht dëshiroj të falenderoj për bashkëpunimin e mirë të gjithë kolegët nga Ministria e Kulturës, Rinjtësisë dhe Sportit, institucionet e ndryshme kulturore në vend dhe në veçanti ekipën lokale dhe ndërkombëtarëve të koordinatorëve të Manifesta 14, të cilët në prapavi, në terren, kanë bërë punë kryesore implementuese e logjistike në mënyrë që ne mund të jemi këtu të pranishëm për të parë pas pak konceptin të kuratorës Catherine Nichols, për të cilën jemi shumë të lumtur që është përzgjedhur për një detyrë të tillë. Më falni pak për stresin dhe momentet e sikletshme, po e kam kënaqësinë dhe nderin që jam këtu në emër të Drejtorisë së Kulturës së Komunës së Prishtinës për një fjalë rasti. Sidoqoftë, si ekipi i Drejtorisë së Kulturës, ne mendojmë dhe besojmë që nuk mund të ketë zhvillim sociokulturor pa edukim të mirëfillt me fokus në art e kulturë, për rifunksionalizim të hapësirës e ndërtesave publike, decentralizim në lagje fshatna, veçanërisht në zhvillim të programeve edukativo kulturore, sepse kultura është identiteti i qytetit. Normalisht, krejt kjo për të ndodhur është jetike bashkëpunimi i ngushtë ndër institucional dhe publiko-civik, që tashmë vetë se kemi shembuj të tillë, e po filloj me i përmend pikërisht me hapësirën ku jemi tash, Kino Armata, për të vazhduar pastaj me hapësirat e ndryshme që tashmë po i rifunksionalizojmë si qendra kulturore në fshatin llokar Stereo Space, komuniteti Termokis me punën e tyre të mrekullueshme në bashkëpunim me Komunën e Prishtinës, Teatri Oda së fundi me bashkëpunimin me Qendrën Multimedia dhe Teatrin Oda, e për të vazhduar pastaj me rifunksionalizim të hapësirave në të ardhmen si Kino Rinia dhe një pjesë e mbetur e rilindjes e disa hapësira të ndryshme në qytet. Si drejtori kemi qenë të përkushtuar gjatë këtyre 2 mandateve në zhvillim të politikave të mirëfillta kulturore dhe shpresoj dhe besoj që edhe mandatarët e ardhshëm do të kenë fokusin e duhur në fushën e kulturës dhe gjithsesi kultura duhet të jetë primare, as sekondare e as terciare. E para, më e rëndësishme, sepse si se thash edhe më lart, kultura është identiteti i qytetit. Do të jemi si ekip dhe personalisht do të jemi gatshëm që gjithmonë në çdo moment të kontribuoj për të mirën e qytetit, për zhvillim sa më të mirë edukativo-kulturor. Andaj, mendoj se është shumë e rëndësishme që të ndërtojmë ura mes veti dhe mos të krijojmë bariera e ndasi. Për fund, për me përmbyll këtë fjalim dhe duke u fokusu më shumë tek puna e madhe që na pret në të ardhmen, dëshiroj të citoj veprimtarin mendjen e shquar shqiptare rilindasin Sami Frashëri, i cili ndër të tjera thot: nëse do të mbjellësh për një vit, mbill misër e grur, nëse kërkon që të mbjellësh për gjithmonë, mbill arsim e kulturë. Ju falenderoj të gjithëve.
Catherine, may we invite you to the microphone for your presentation?
I'd like to begin, can everyone hear me well, I guess? I'd like to begin by saying thank you warmly to all three of you for the warm introduction. I feel extremely honored and privileged and excited to be here and to be part of the Manifesta team and to have the opportunity of working with so many of you. I actually also have the privilege of already knowing many of the people in the audience, which is quite extraordinary. And I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to let those relationships grow and to learn from you and to be able to work with you to make Manifesta into something that is here for the long term and is really good. I just need the magic wand. So, is the magic wand working? Where do I need to point it, Tren?
Can you help her?
Yeah, can you help me, please? Is it on? Maybe it's not switched on. Let's have a go.
Can you put your microphone a little bit higher?
Right side, not to left.
It's still not working. Okay, so can you please change the slide then for me?
Sometimes technology challenges, so give us a second.
Sure. Okay, back. Go back, 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 back.
Can you try?
Okay,
Yes.
great. So, let's begin. When I visited Prishtina in late August, the people I encountered, the conversations I had, the work I witnessed gave me a palpable sense of the power that lies in stories, of the transformative energy to be found in the act, in the practice of storytelling itself. I had the good fortune of being in Prishtina on the invitation of the Manifesta team, and that meant that I had the benefit of delving into the extensive urban, cultural and historical research that Carlo Ratti, his colleagues and the Manifesta team have been conducting, much of which you were introduced to this morning, but there's a lot more. I had the privilege of being introduced to the many fascinating, frequently under-recognized public spaces of the city by the Prishtina team, who know the place and its history like the backs of their hand. And I had the opportunity to meet with the many extraordinary artists, writers, historians, thinkers, and activists from Prishtina, Prizren, Kosovo, and the whole region, who gave me a very fast, and yet, for such a short space of time, surprisingly profound insight into their politics and practices, their experiences, and their expectations. In all of this, I very much profited from the practice of Hedwig Fijen and the Manifesta team, who've become extremely adept as they move from city to city throughout Europe in closely collaborating with people from all different realms of society to really get to know a place, to sensitively and to respectfully learn what has shaped that place and its people, to listen and to join in thinking about the kinds of transformation that people aspire to, and to work together to find intelligent and creative ways of tapping into or building upon what's already happening. And from what I can already tell, that's quite a lot. So what really struck me and what really inspired me was the sheer number of people and initiatives working in some way with narrative techniques. Narrative techniques to grasp, to counteract, to overcome, to heal the sustained policy of material and immaterial erasure and dispossession and dispersion of a large proportion of society. Until spending time in Prishtina, until starting to read everything I could get my hands on about contemporary life in Kosovo, I don't think I've ever so keenly felt that it's storytelling that brings into being the public realm, the space between you and me. That it's storytelling that might enable us to engage with one another, and as plural and as diverse as we might be, to act together, to act in concert, to bring forth a more than human common world, a world based on coactivity, on praxis, as opposed to more essentializing modes of collectivity such as co-identity, co-membership, co-property, or co-ownership. It was this experience in Prishtina, the experience that I took home with me to Berlin to think about, that made me want to work with contemporary theorist Donna Haraway's idea of storytelling as a means of heightening political and social engagement, as a means of actively staying with the trouble, as she puts it, with the trouble we've inherited on a global scale and with the trouble we perpetuate on a similarly global scale. The idea goes something like this. Familiar narratives based on human exceptionalism, nationalist ideologies, and capitalist triumphalism inevitably end badly. They are violent tales of ultimate extinction, never of ongoingness. They world worlds in which paralysis prevails over participation and private interests prevail over public political action. The question is, how can we tell stories otherwise? How, to cite Donna Haraway again, can we collectively develop stories of still possible recuperation, still possible recovery? How can we reach into, I'm quoting now, rich pasts to sustain thick presence, to keep the story going for those who come after? What new worlds might we world if, in the words of political philosopher Hannah Arendt, we practice thinking with an enlarged mentality, if we consciously train our imagination to go visiting? So that's where the title comes from. It matters what worlds world worlds, how to tell stories otherwise. The concept I've developed consists of 6 interrelated proposals. These intimately interact and intertwine with the urban study and interventions, with the parallel programs and events that already form an integral part of Manifesta. As you may recognize from the ideas I'm presenting, many of the ideas build on my work in the context of Voice 2021, the project that Hedwig mentioned before in her introduction of my biography. They do that insofar as they expand the concept of art, insofar as they are all inherently multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, insofar as they seek to be open-ended, inclusive, and socially transformative, and insofar as they revolve around thinking, around plasticity, and around the quest for radically democratic forms. The first and central proposal I'm making is a Centre for Narrative Practice at the Hifzi Soleimani Library. The second proposal is a Centre for Eco-Urban Learning at the Brick Factory. The third proposal is a parcours with around 20 artistic interventions at locations researched as part of the urban study we heard from this morning. The fourth proposal is to transform the Grand Hotel into a multidisciplinary creative research centre. The fifth proposal is to establish an online radio station. And the sixth proposal is to develop a series of walks designed to sense and to story the city in new ways. So let me quickly take you through the six proposals to give you an idea of the overall structure of the creative mediation concept and to show you how each idea relates to the practice, the politics, and the promise of storytelling. Number one, the Centre for Narrative Practice. The Centre for Narrative Practice can be considered the nucleus, the heart, the core of the creative mediation proposal. It currently has the working title being singular plural, a title I've drawn from the work of French philosopher Jean-Luc Nancy. The idea for the centre was inspired by Prishtina, and it takes Prishtina as its point of departure. When I say Prishtina, I mean specifically the plethora of people, organisations, and collectives engaged in recording and storing the stories of missing people and buildings, monuments and documents, artefacts and archives. I mean the practices of storytelling emerging and evolving there, practices from which other cultures can learn, and vice versa, practices which can grow and profit from being situated in a broader cultural, multidisciplinary, and indeed multi-species context. The idea is to work closely with people in Prishtina and Kosovo to establish a sustainable and broadly accessible institution that brings this extensive and exemplary memory work being done here together in one place. The development of the institution is a long-term project designed to bring forth an attractive, inclusive, comfortable place of study, learning, creation, and conviviality, a place that is of central importance and ongoing importance to the community. An archive and digital platform provide the main pillars of the institution. In addition, the Centre for Narrative Practice accommodates an open shelf reference library and reading rooms, a permanent and a temporary exhibition space, a project space, conference rooms, a black box for film screenings, media production studios, a radio station, a children's exhibition and project space, as well as a cafe or restaurant which enhances or underscores the welcoming, hospitable environment. In the side and the rear buildings of the library, the new institution will also house the education headquarters of Manifesta and provide space for co-creativity and conservation workshops and also further studios. The facilities provided, technical equipment, tools and training, are intended to enable the community and visitors from other regions and countries to conduct research there and to use that research and material available to produce new stories in the form of videos, podcasts, radio features and other forms of visual arts. That way the participants add new material and new stories to the archive and keep it ongoing. So by situating the materials gathered in a broader international historical and theoretical discourse, an approach strengthened by residencies, art and curatorial research projects, the emergent institution places co-creative narrative practice at the centre of its mission. That's why it functions as the nucleus of the Manifesta project. All other components of the programme take their bearings from the questions raised and the narrative strategies explored here at this site of collaborative, experimental and multidisciplinary learning. Oh, backwards, forwards, number 2. The Centre for Eco-Urban Learning. I propose transforming the brick factory into a centre for eco-urban learning, which, like the Centre for Narrative Practice, should ideally establish itself as a long-term site of learning and storytelling. Here I'm working with the title Radical Imagination and Commons Sense, thereby hooking into the concept developed by Carlo Ratti and the MIT Sensible Lab as part of the extensive urban study they're conducting and we've been privy to hearing about this morning. The addition of radical imagination to the existing title of common sense brings into play the speculative fabulation needed to world new urban worlds. The centre is inspired by alternative interdisciplinary learning institutions in the tradition of Black Mountain College, founded in North Carolina in 1933, the Free International University envisaged by Joseph Beuys in the 1970s, or to give a more recent example, the various laboratories and schools dreamed up by the experimental architects Traumlabor Berlin, many of you may have heard of them, with whom I've collaborated on numerous occasions. Over the past few months, we've been running a lab together in Düsseldorf called Sculptural Democracy, Forms of the We, which is taking place as part of the Beuys 2021 program in North Rhine-Westphalia. The project of theirs, which you can see now on the screen, is that I find most inspiring in this context is the floating university that they established in a rainwater retention basin of Berlin's former Tempelhof airport. It was a contaminated concrete pool of muddy water with a rich variety of plants, birds, amphibians and insects. The university was originally supposed to be there for a period of 6 months, so like a biennial or like a Manifesta. However, and this is the important point, 3 years later, it's still there and it's absolutely thriving as a meeting place for students, urbanologists and cultural experts from all over Europe, in fact from all over the world, until COVID came, of course. It's run by an association which was set up to manage the site as an ongoing institution, or rather exstitution, as the members of Raumlabor prefer to call it. The Centre for Eco-Urban Learning could also incorporate a small number of public art interventions, a large-scale urban garden, and an organic restaurant. So they're all ideas that we would need to talk about with Carlo Ratti and the people of Prishtina to see what would be desirable there. But as you can see, it's very much set up for longevity and for a very wide-based community involvement, particularly through the urban gardening, which has taken off all over the world as a really important movement. Number 3, public art interventions. As anyone who's been to Manifesta knows, the parkour is a major part of the program. So far, I've proposed some 20 interventions all around town. The interventions are situated at a selection of the many historically charged, visually arresting places researched as part of the urban study. We hope to be able to release the names of the artists in the not too distant future. I'm sure everybody's very curious, but we're still in the negotiation process, and so we'll have to ask for your patience for that, but that means we can meet again soon, so I hope you'll accept that for the moment. So what I'm going to do instead of presenting artists is to give you an insight into the sites that I have in mind, to give you a brief idea of how the parkour would unfold across the city. It's very important to remember that the sites I'm about to show only refer to the parkour of public art interventions. The overall program incorporates numerous other sites and institutions that are still being finalised, and they will also be presented to you at the next stage. So let's just have a quick look. The Adam Yashari Square, Kino Rinia, Mother Teresa Boulevard, Zahid Payat Square, the National Library inside, the National Library outside, the Institute of Albinology, the Sports Stadium car park, the planetarium, the car park at Bororamiz, Vilindia, the Memorial Park, the prison, the bus station we've heard about this morning, the railway tunnel, the Great Hammam, the Association of Political Prisoners, the former Academy of Science, and here specifically the garden, the Museum of Kosovo, the Gamia department store, billboards, the Gamia swimming pool. I have to say it's my favorite place in town. I love this place. I've never seen anything like it in all my life. Beautiful. and the Protocollar building. So there may be changes to that. I mean, there are many other places, and it's very hard to choose, of course, and it depends very much on the artists who are chosen, and when they come to the city, they may fall in love with another place. But that more or less, that's the selection of places that we're considering at the moment. The artists, just to give you a little idea of the kinds of artists I have in mind, the ones who've been selected for the interventions, and indeed for other parts of the proposal, come from all over the world. Yet there's a strong representation of artists living in Europe, and of course from Kosovar artists. Many of the artists proposed are established mid-career artists, but there would also be a strong presence, particularly in the Grand Hotel, and I'll get to talking about that in a moment, of younger up-and-coming artists from Prishtina, as well as from former and future Manifesta cities. The artistic interventions work across sculpture, installation, film, video, sound, and also more literary, poetic forms. They've been chosen for their capacity to imagine existing worlds otherwise. They do this by differently weaving the threads of history and experience together such that new stories might emerge. In the process, their techniques of worlding and storytelling come to the fore. In apprehending the works, we as viewers can glean a sense of the narrative modes and imaginaries they critique, and of those which they invent. The works or artistic positions have equally been chosen for their capacity to engage with the stories of the respective place in which they would be shown, and how that engagement would actually take shape would be developed on site by the artist. It would really make sense to involve local researchers in the conception process to ensure that the stories of the places are at least investigated and somehow told, whether by being incorporated into the artwork in some way or by flowing into the holdings of the Centre for Narrative Practice at the Hifzi Suleimani Library. Number 4, the Centre for Multidisciplinary Research. Manifesta 14 provides the opportunity to work with the heterotopic space of the Grand Hotel, a world within a world, a liminal site of social encounter, to launch an associative and also long-term inquiry into one of the key questions we're looking at, namely, what role do art and art thinking play in bringing forth the public realm, the side of politics? Here the idea is to create a multidisciplinary creative research centre. The title I'm working with for that is Hotel Heterotopia. These are all working titles, by the way. It's important to remember they're there to sort of inspire and to make the imagination run wild. They may end up being different in the long term. So one of the key goals here is to explore how spaces can be reclaimed for urban life based on diversity, participatory neighbourhood practices, and cooperative models for sustainable coexistence in the city. It sets itself up in creative and poetic opposition to the market-driven development that has shaped Prishtina and other cities across the world in the past decades. It's intended to become a thought space with a strong focus on works of poetry, performance, visual arts, music and philosophy from Kosovo and the Western Balkans, which it brings into dialogue with international artists, scientists and thinkers, and of course thinkers and scientists from here. That goes without saying, both contemporary and historic. It will also present outstanding works of art and thought from Roma communities throughout Europe. Hotel Heterotopia comprises several interwoven platforms, such as an exhibition, satellites for the parallel events of Manifesta 14, both those from Prishtina and Europe at large, and a lab for multidisciplinary research, citizen science, and participatory neighbourhood practice. The lab would focus on 2 pilot projects which would work as a model for the future. The first of those projects is called The Missing River on the State of Water in Kosovo, and the second one is called The Conspiracy of Breathers on the state of air, soil and biodiversity in Prishtina. Here, people will also be able to view a display of the findings of the urban study, that great big book that we saw this morning. That should be visible in exhibition form, and we can collaborate on how to make that accessible to a really broad range of people. But that's yet to come. So both during and after Manifesta, the hotel would still continue to operate at the same capacity as it does now, which is around 30%. So it's going to be a hotel and a research centre all in one and totally entangled. Number 5 is the online radio station. Radio Manifesta, I'm calling it at the moment, would be established as a long-term project within the Centre for Narrative Practice at the Hifzi Suleimani Library. But during the 100 days of Manifesta 14, there could be a satellite studio established in a pavilion either on the top of Radio Prishtina or on the Mother Teresa Boulevard, and this would have the advantage of capturing way more public attention. The radio station would be run by an accomplished international radio artist and researcher working in tandem with an artist or writer, for that matter, and researcher from Prishtina, who would be supported by a team of experienced radio artists who are also from Prishtina and Kosovo. The aim is to bring radio art to the people and to open the airwaves for a participatory international exchange of radio art, featuring both professionals and beginners. It would be ideal to establish a dialogue with the free radio stations around the world. That's something we've also been doing with Voice Radio, a project that I'm working on at the moment, and it's going extremely well. And another part of the project would be to research and to document the radio scene in Prishtina and Kosovo, particularly looking at the role played by underground and independent radio during the 1980s and the 1990s. And as far as I know from my preliminary research, that was a very, very important role. So it gives us an opportunity to look into that in greater detail and to document it and make it available as part of the archive. So we're already moving on to the 6th and final part of the proposal. It's about walking. As the final part of the proposal, I'm suggesting walks which, as I mentioned right at the start, are designed to allow people to sense and to story the city in new ways. To give you an idea, just a very brief idea of the kind of walks I have in mind, I'll just mention 2 projects I find inspiring. The first project is called Speculative Tourism. It's an international project, an already existing project that operates at the crossroads of science fiction, historical tourism, augmented reality, and local action. Its goal is freeing the political imagination while shedding light on local identities and reacquainting people, ourselves, with our lived environments. Its creators, it's a team from Tel Aviv in Israel, they use speculation and fiction to reveal different ways of taking responsibility for our habitats and our future. The second project is called Sonic Explorers. That was developed by the sound art specialist Carsten Seifert as a collaborative exchange between artists from Bonn, Tehran, Dakar, and Valparaiso. The explorers investigate the nature of the acoustic consequences of social, political, and aesthetic transformations and their corresponding effects on our lives and work in urban environments. So there you have it. 6 proposals and 1 theme: how to tell stories otherwise. Manifesta 14 is going to be running from the 22nd of July 22nd of July 2022 through until the 30th of October 2022. Let's return to the title. It matters what worlds, how to tell stories otherwise. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Catherine. And as Catherine already mentioned, and also the Minister, these are proposals. And of course, they will be discussed. There is already ideas about what sort of artists, participants, but of course, this is a work in process. Can I invite people to ask questions to Catherine or members of the panel, please?
I have one question from the international press. from Le Moniteur magazine, from Christian van Verbeek. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. It's to Catherine. Boyce said that everyone can be an artist, and you are the artistic director of Boyce 2021. How will this statement be manifested in the artistic program you are building for Manifesta?
It's the central idea of what I've been thinking about for the last 2.5 years, actually. And I think that it makes perfect sense to work with that idea here. And indeed, it makes perfect sense to live with that idea in our everyday lives. I mean, it's something that everybody could adopt. I think that what's key about it is that it means that we're working with everybody here. Everybody has the capacity, through their inherent creativity, to change, to shape the environment around them. And that's why Boyce is a completely radical thinker, because he just presumes that we all have the capacity to think, we have the creativity, our capacity to change things begins in our minds, in our language, in the language we use, by a very active speech and thought. We are already being sculptural, we're already shaping. And so I thought it was very important to bring that idea here, because the key word, the key idea in Prishtina and of Manifesta is transformation. This is about transforming this place collectively into something else. And so you can actually think of it in very Boycean terms of it being one large social sculpture that we're endeavouring to involve as many people as possible from all walks of life. And I would like to have had more time to explain how that actually works, because the whole concept is set up to invite people really from science, from everywhere, from schools, to work together on this. And so that's why, yeah, I think it couldn't be more pertinent for the Manifesta to work with that idea.
Thank you, Catherine. Any questions in the room? I have lots from the French press. So maybe there's nothing yet to come from the room. Hedwig, this one for you. During Manifesta, there was a team, this is from Les Echos. During Manifesta 13, there was a team of 4 creative mediators from different backgrounds. Why have you decided, or has Manifesta decided, for one single creative mediator for this upcoming edition?
As I said in my speech, in every Manifesta, we experiment with different creative mediator models. And it's dependent on the sort of mediation. We were extremely lucky to have already Carlo Ratti in our team, but also Arna Macic, a Bosnia-Herzegovina architect. And I thought the immense knowledge and vision of Catherine could very much add it up to the layers of knowledge production which Carlo Ratti and Arna Macic. So it's not a single person. Catherine is going to work extensively with Carlo Ratti and Arna Macic, and of course with the Manifesta 14 team. So it will be a team included with 3 different specialized persons.
Perfect, thank you. Then I also have one for either the Director of Culture or the Minister. I will allow for you guys to battle out who answers it. This is from La Provence. The Centre of Narrative Practice is the Centre of Narrative Practice going to stay after Manifesta 14 has gone, and how will it be financed?
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's for us.
Hedwig knows.
Yes. Well, as I said this morning, excuse me, I'm taking a pastille for my throat. As I said this morning, we learned very much from Palermo, because in Palermo we developed the Teatro Garibaldi. And we very hoped that this very lively, let's say, city hall of the Manifesta 12 would continue. But we made a mistake ourselves. We didn't include funding proposals inside the budget. And anticipating that, we're now talking to a diversity of donors internationally, philanthropic organizations. And our ambition is, before we open the Isi Suleimani Center, that we can also present a post-Manifesta master plan, business plan, exploitation model, etc., including the funding bodies, because we know that this is key to the functionality. One funding body has already taken over the cost of the training and the capacity building of some of the people, and we hope that the long-term tandem could be established between the Dutch Rijksacademy and Artists in Residence and the ISI Suleimani to provide knowledge, possibly also financial means to establish this on a long term. So very good question, very important to work on this, priority number one.
Okay, quickly. So I'd prefer focusing on principles rather than talking on particular interventions or institutions we are going to establish. And for me, there are two main principles in doing all the, what is expected from Manifesta. First is collaboration, and second is sustainability. So collaboration, especially in terms of involving Kosovo cultural and arts community in delivering all what Manifesta is expected to. And second is sustainability of the interventions. We have to think them through, so we make sure that whatever we develop is there to stay and serve the community even after Manifesta. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Çeku. Thank you, Hedwig. Do we have any more questions from in the room? No? Well, then I would like to invite all of you to have a cup of coffee afterwards to come and meet Hedwig, to meet Catherine especially, to ask your questions in person if you're too shy to ask them here. Thank you everyone for joining online as well. Thank you everyone for joining physically, and we look forward to seeing you soon again. Thank you.
How are you? Good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was very nice, yeah.